Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this podcast, what we're going to talk about is generational toughness. Now, I know you're probably wondering, okay, well, what is generational toughness? Well, what I want to kind of examine is how tough is this current generation compared to others. Um, I know everything is relative and it's all perspective. So, just bear with me as I, take this journey. But, you know, when you look at the current generation of kids, uh, and then the current generation of young adults. I mean, like you can get into the millennials and zennials and all of that other crap. I don't know any of that stuff, so I'm not going. I'm not going to delve into the numbers, but um, just relatively speaking, I was having a conversation with one of my homeboys, and he just made the comment. He's like, "Man, these kids just aren't that tough." And he wasn't even talking about from a sports perspective. He was just talking about in general. And, he's like me, we have kids, so it's not like we're speaking out of turn. And I don't want to be the old get off my lawn type of guy. But, you know, uh, this podcast might sound a little bit like that, but I just wanted to kind of talk about just, some of the subtle and maybe some of the not so subtle differences between, generations from the past and generations of and the generation of today. Um, you know, like I mentioned before, I have kids. If you're not familiar with me and my background, uh, I have four kids, three sons and a daughter. My sons, at the time of this recording, their ages are 22, 19, and 15, and our daughter is 10. Um, and so a lot of times, when I'm talking to my kids, uh, whether or not I'm passing on wisdom or if I'm just, just talking to them, I tend to tell them like, hey, when I was a kid, this right here happened, or we did this, or we did that. And our middle son, Cameron, who's 19, one of his one of his favorite phrases is, well, Dad, this isn't the 90s anymore. And it makes me want to smack him. But I mean, I tell him all the time, like, no, this isn't the 90s. But at the same time, you know, we did things a certain way, and you guys do things a little bit different. And for lack of a better term, some of the things y'all do are whack and it's soft. But I try to show them a better way. Case in point, like um, when I compare like my childhood as opposed to theirs, like simple things. Like for me in my house, growing up, we had to do chores. So doing chores consisted of at my house, taking out the trash, washing the dishes, sweeping the floors, vacuuming, um, raking the leaves in the yard, cutting the grass, sweeping the driveway. We had a long ass driveway too. Uh, sweeping the driveway, things of that nature. And, my kids, they don't really do much of any of that. I mean, like, yeah, they wash the dishes and they clean their rooms sometimes and they they vacuum, but as far as like outside chores, like, they don't cut the grass, I pay somebody to do that. And they don't sweep the driveway because the driveway gets blown and everything when the guys cut the grass. So um it's little subtle differences and things of that nature. But like one of the things we used to hear always growing up, and I'm sure if you're of my age or around my age bracket, you would hear this. The older generation used to tell us, hey, you got to earn your keep. And what that meant was like, as an adult, they weren't charging, they weren't charging the kids rent or anything like that. Like, but you had to do things around the house to, basically earn your stay there at the crib. So, and I don't think for a second that they were going to kick us out, but at the same time, you know, it, they were teaching us responsibility, right? And I think that goes a long way. Um, Also, with our generation, we learned a little bit different ways how to deal with each other. Um, Obviously, the biggest thing is because my generation was probably the last generation that grew up without the internet. So the friendships that we, cultivated and maintained, um, we did them in person. We didn't have any online friends. I mean, because there was no such thing as online. Or by the time the internet really kicked off, I mean, we were adults. Uh, and I think there's something to be said about that generation and the generations that preceded us. Being able to maintain friendships and relationships, um, in person, or the novel concept of writing a letter to a friend or a loved one or a girlfriend or boyfriend. Um, as opposed to now, technologies, and I've talked about this a lot on this podcast. Technology is a great thing. I don't want to, I don't want to sound like I'm dumping on technology, but there's a level of discourse sometimes when you're dealing with technology, because you can become somewhat spoiled, or you know kind of lose touch with reality, if you will, because you're dealing with people online. Now, I'd be the first to admit, like, I have friends online. There are probably quite a few of you that listen to this podcast that consider me to be a friend, or at least a strong associate, and you know me and I know you, and we've never met before in real life, and that's cool. um and I appreciate that, and I appreciate whatever level of friendship or associate, or us being associates. I appreciate whatever level we connect on, but there's a connection, and we've made this connection via maybe this podcast or my blog or whatever the case may be, or social media, whatever it is. And I appreciate that. And I think there's something to be said for that. But with this generation, you know, if someone unfriends you on Facebook, well, I mean, these youngsters don't use Facebook. But I mean, like, if somebody unfollows you on IG, or they unfollow you on Twitter, they get bent out of shape, or God forbid someone says something negative about you. You're getting bullied online. And I don't want to make light of that, but uh, bullying was different, in the 90s. I mean, like, they literally threatened to come kick your ass. Or maybe they did come and kick your ass. It wasn't somebody, on the other side of the world with keyboard courage, talking trash to you behind a, you know, firewall. But I mean, again, how tough is this generation if you have friendships online, or you have relationships online, and when they break down, you break down? I don't know. Doesn't sound too tough to me. Another thing we talked about, me and my boy talked about, was just the overall mental toughness of this generation. And I don't want to make it sound like I don't think that they're mentally tough, because they are. Because in reality, this generation, like my kids and their friends, they've been through a lot. They've seen a lot. I mean, like, when you think about the historical events that have happened in their lifetime, like I said, our oldest, Dion, is 22. In his lifetime, he's seen a lot. I mean, like, he wasn't old enough to remember 9/11, but everything that happened from 9/11 beyond, up until today, he's seen things. And I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff that's probably we probably didn't see it in, real time, or we didn't know about it or anything like that because we just didn't have the technology. But, if I don't know, if a cop shoots an unarmed citizen, an unarmed black man, you know, we would probably hear something about that. Wherein this generation, they can see it on their phones and it's 24/7. So, I get the fact that they've been through a lot. Um, they've had circumstances, but with the advent of technology, you know, you have to ask the question, when bad things happen, how do you deal with them? Um, in my generation, we were just kind of told, hey, you better figure that shit out. Like, there was no, trying to coddle your feelings or, process things. And I don't know, in a lot of ways that might not have been necessarily a good thing. Um, this generation of kids, uh, they will go to counseling. They will seek, help for their mental um things that they're dealing with mentally. Um, in my generation, it was, and it's kind of sad to say, but like, you couldn't necessarily have, like, you could, like, if you went to counseling, like, people would think you're soft or crazy or something. The older generations, and I think that's where there was a huge disconnect between the older generations and my generation, was that, like, they suffered through so much, like, just to give you an idea, like, my parents lived through the civil rights movement. And my parents are obviously still here. Um, but yeah, so they lived through the civil rights movement. So, they saw so much and saw so much oppression and so much. I mean, like, dealing with Jim Crow. And my mother grew up in the South, my dad grew up in the North. And so even though both of them lived, totally different lives, they saw a lot. But, having that, and then, being able to, on my mom's side, go back, to my great great grandmother who was a slave. That's a lot. So I mean, like, that's not that far back. Like, you really don't have to go back far in your family tree to be back into slavery. So, there's a certain level of PTSD that is there that is never addressed. And they didn't really address it in their generation. Then, to be honest, it got passed down to us. And, we grew up uh in our generation, seeing a lot of crime, drugs, sexuality, um, in the neighborhoods. And you didn't necessarily have to be in the hood to see that kind of stuff, but I mean, like, it was there, and a lot of it wasn't really addressed. So, I mean, it made us mentally tough, but it also, we a lot of stuff was also ignored if you think about it. And it was just like, okay, yeah, you got to deal with it. And to be honest, like, I think when people of our generation had issues, like, people were quick to label you. Like, I remember people being labeled slow or crazy. Like, and that's so funny to me because, like, just the idea, the concept of going to counseling, like, going to counseling and dealing with your mental health now is something that is very apropos. It's something that a lot of people do, and it's very necessary for a lot of people, and it's very helpful. But, you know, if you told somebody in 92 that you were going to counseling, they'd look at you like you were like, counseling? Are you strung out? And so, I think that was part of, some of that could have been basically what the older generations had passed down to us. And again, it's different levels of PTSD and all of the things that we dealt with. Uh, so I would definitely say that this generation is probably a lot more mentally tough than we were, because, or just, I won't say, maybe I don't want to say that they're more mentally tougher than us. They're more prepared because they have a better grip on things. If they see something that's not right, they're probably more likely to address it, as opposed to us. You put some tussin on it, rub some dirt on it, put some tussin on it, and figure that shit out and like keep going. Like there's no there's no pause for the cause to try to figure things out. And that could be very detrimental to your own mental health and well-being if you really think about it. Um and obviously the next thing, like physical health. Uh this generation, because of the advent of technology, they aren't as physical because they don't go outside as much. And when they do go outside, they're holding a cell phone. Wherein we didn't have, the technology. So I always tell people like the place where we all went was outside. And why do we go outside? We went outside because everything was happening outside. Somebody was playing ball outside. Somebody was, jumping rope. Somebody was running, playing freeze tag, playing hide and go seek. Everything was happening outside. The cute girls were outside. The fly guys were outside. There was nothing happening in your house. Your house really in the 80s and 90s was kind of like the last place you wanted to be during the daytime. Like you wanted to be outside. And it didn't matter if you lived in New York City, if you lived in Florence, South Carolina. Outside was the place to be. And so, this generation, it's a little different. So they're not outside, they're not running around. So it's less exercise for the youth. And subsequently, you got these kids who suffer from obesity, at an early age. And it's crazy because like I see some little kids now and it's like, man, these little kids are huge, and it ain't just the chicken. I mean, like at some point you got to get outside and run. I mean, because that's what we did. We got outside and we ran all day long. And I mean, like, I just remember being at home during the summertime out from school, and the only time you would come in the house, you might come in the house to eat lunch. Maybe. If you could go get some chips and a soda from someplace, you do that as opposed to coming in the house, because guess what? If you came in the house, your mom might tell you to stay there. But yeah, these kids nowadays are less active. Um, and like I said, everything is in their phone. So when we were outside, our generation, we walked, we rode bikes, we ran, we did outside chores. We were outside. I mean, and we literally were outside. And what's interesting is that more often than not, when you come across people from my generation, we still like to be outside. Now, outside is kind of hot now. I don't care where you live. It's I maintain that, and I don't know if it's the ozone layer or whatever the case may be, but it wasn't that the summers weren't this hot when we were kids. It just weren't. I'm sorry. Like it's like 1,000 degrees every day in the summertime. And I mean, obviously, I live in Atlanta, so it's hot here. I mean, it's not like I live in, Buffalo, but yeah, more often than not, the people from my generation still to this day, we like to be outside. We're not trying to be inside, and not if we can help it, especially if the weather's nice. Now, if it's cold outside or if it's, hot, we're probably inside. But, that's one of the biggest differences between generations is that the current generation isn't as physical. They're not in as good of physical health, if you will. But they can change that. And how can you change it? Take your ass outside. um, Spoiled. Is this generation spoiled? Yes. Were we spoiled? Yes, because I can honestly say that my generation, we had we were the post civil rights generation. Um, if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you probably got a lot of stuff. And you probably got a lot of stuff that your parents didn't get. And the reason why you probably got a lot of stuff that your parents didn't get was because your parents probably worked a lot more harder than your grandparents did in order to get you those things, because they probably grew up without, or maybe they had a bunch of siblings and they couldn't really afford to kind of spread the wealth around, if you will. Um, so yeah, it was a situation where we got a lot. So we definitely got spoiled. Um, so was I spoiled? Yes. Are my children spoiled? Hell yeah. But I work hard, and my wife and I, we work hard, and we want to reward our kids, um and that's what we do. So they get a lot. They earn most of what they get, but because we're parents and we love our kids, we give them stuff. So yeah, they're spoiled. Um, but it's kind of like that Tupac line, even though we didn't have a bunch, but it seemed like we had enough. We always had enough. Um, but I can honestly say, like, in my lifetime, we didn't have everything we actually had everything that we needed, and we had most of what we wanted. Like, I can't remember Christmases not getting the bike or getting the Atari 2600 or getting, some skates or football. Anytime I asked for something, more often than not at Christmas, I got it. Um, and today's generation, for the most part, these kids, they have it all. I mean, like, they have everything at the push of a button. I mean, like, they literally could, do a book report from their phone. I mean, we had to use the Dewey Decimal System at the library. You ask a kid right now what the Dewey Decimal System is, they couldn't tell you. Um, One of the funniest things that always happens, well, it happens from time to time in my house. Uh, if you want to see how spoiled a kid is, let the Wi-Fi go out. Man, listen, I love my kids. My kids lose their mind when the Wi-Fi goes out, or if it goes down, or if it's slow. Oh my God, Dad, what's going on with the Wi-Fi? I'm like, man, relax. Take your ass outside, man. Don't worry about the Wi-Fi. It's working. It's working for me. And they hate when I say that. But I mean, like, yeah, they're definitely spoiled. Um, they're very, reliant upon computers and, technology. And I get it. I mean, if I grew up in this generation, I probably would too. But and it's not just my kids, it's your kids, it's the kids that we see every day. That's just where this generation is. Um, and there's really not much that we can do because they've grown up this way. So, you really can't change the game in the ninth inning for them. I mean, it is what it is at this point. But yeah, they're spoiled. I mean, this generation, to be quite honest, they have it all. And it's all your fault. So that takes me back to the original question. How tough is this generation compared to others? I think, all jokes aside, I think this generation is very tough. They have mental toughness. They're not as physically fit as we are, or we were, and they're definitely spoiled. But I think ultimately, um, they're tough because they've seen a lot and they've been through a lot. And I think more than anything else, we've set an example for them, and hopefully they're following our examples. And hopefully they're not making the same mistakes that we did. Hopefully they're learning from the things that we didn't do, capitalizing on it, and running with, you know, the levels of success that we've had and the paths that we've blazed for them, because it's there. You just got to kind of pay attention to it. But yeah, they're tough. They're tough. Um, could they have lived in our generation? Mm, probably not. They ain't that tough. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I'm your boy, 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.